Maybe I'll just start. It is great to have democracy and to witness democracy in Taiwan. But then before we even get into that, we should look at one question that overshadows everything. In recent years, I think it's really important that the world is beginning to notice that Taiwan has a very strong democratic system developing here. And of course, everyone is happy that democracy has finally come to Taiwan. But I think one question that should be examined is not in a sense that, the happiness of Taiwan getting democracy, but the real question is, why did it come so late? If you look at World War II, at the end of World War II, we had Nazi Germany defeated, we had militaristic Japan defeated, and the Allies occupied those countries, and Taiwan was supposedly returned to the care of Chiang Kai-shek. And Nazi Germany, interestingly enough, within a decade was able to go from a one dominant controlling Nazi party to a multi-party system, and the martial law that was inflicted after World War II was raised in less than 10 years. The same is true in Japan. Japan went from the control of the military group to a country where they had a multi-party democracy, and the martial law was able to be lifted within 10 years. Taiwan, which was given to the care of a supposedly democratic group, the KMT, had to suffer for 40 more years under martial law. And you can ask, why was Nazi Germany and militaristic Japan able to cast off martial law so quick? And so why were Germany and Japan able to get rid of martial law so quick, and also to have a multi-party system in their democracy, whereas Taiwan would continue in martial law until 1987 and would have a one-party controlling system up until that time as well? These are the real questions that have to be examined in the background of Taiwan. And I think it's with that backdrop. Now, many people tout, that Taiwan achieved an economic miracle, and it did. But likewise, Germany and Japan also achieved an economic miracle after World War II. And so the question still comes back, is not that the economic miracle, all the countries worked hard to achieve it. But why did this country, which was not a conquered nation, have to sit under martial law and have one-party dominance for so long? Really, about the amount of time of dominance, you might look at Russia. Before really the beginnings of the democratic movement in Russia began. And of course, there is one country still that has this really controlling power, and that is the PRC, People's Republic of China.
So why do you think it took so long for Taiwan to lift martial law?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
What's the difference?
And why the difference? The difference to me is really there was one man and one party that wanted to keep control. And Chiang Kai-shek finally died in 1975. And his son, Chiang Ching-kuo, kept but finally gave way through a lot of pressure from things like the Kaohsiung incident, pressure from the fact that their state-controlled media could not control to the outside world what was happening within their bounds. You know, that here was a country that was supposedly on the side of the democratic allies, and they really were reacting just like other totalitarian governments.
I guess could you go into the Confucianism way of thinking, like the earliest roots of the KMT, and like what we were talking about before, like.
Okay, that's a pretty long argument to bring into.
I still think it's very important, though.
The
why is the KMT's progression towards a quote unquote true democracy so slow, and like why did it always seem like certain things had to be met before we could have real democracy? Was this the Chinese? Are Chinese people just not capable of being democratic or something?
Right. Okay. And I don't think. Yeah. And that's a question some people raise. I believe, in my mind, the democracy is not antithetical to Chinese culture. But I do think there are some strong cultural things that have to be overcome as China seeks a democracy. And one really is the, perhaps call it, misapplication of Confucianism, that Confucianism as it has been applied has never been applied in its ideal form, but has really created a power culture in Chinese society. Confucianism always rests in their relationships between a superior and an inferior, except in the one relationship of friend to friend. But the basic premise of Confucianism, whether it be emperor to subject, father to son, older brother to younger brother, husband to wife, these are all cast in the framework of a superior to inferior relationship. Each side has its obligations, and in an ideal system, supposedly it would work out. But the reality is that when you have such a power culture, the one in power soon forgets his obligations and looks only that it is superior to inferior. And that's what makes it difficult for many to wonder how you can handle a democracy where compromise is an essential part. Compromise and tolerance of totally different opinions. Well, those are very valid questions, and I'm sure in some ways they're being overcharged. But I don't know enough of the specifics there to really give a clear answer on that. So, but my experience with the mass rapid transit system, I saw a lot of overpayment, and it's balanced out in different ways that the public never knows. Could be now, like, well, just one, for instance, I think I told you, we paid when the Dortz people were going to learn the Matra system for light rail. This is about 4 or 5 years before it even was constructed. They were studying in France, and they were paying the French government 10,000 per person per month in training. That's a lot of money. And most of those people that were trained never got into the positions they were trained for. On the coming December elections, I think this certainly will be something to watch, because right now, after the presidential elections, the balance of power was almost 50-50. But already in the Kaohsiung elections, we saw that the PFP got no seats. And the legislative elections in December will be a real telling. I had mentioned before that from 96 to 2000 to 2004, the KMT and the PFP, their breakoff, had lost over 4 million votes. Now, because of the, in a way, dissatisfaction that many seem to feel with the way the KMT has handled their loss, and their refusing in a way to come to grips with the reality of what the people are looking for, they will probably lose heavily in the December election. So that is a real one to watch for the future, because if the trend continues, this will be the clear death knell of the old school KMT, and they will have to face that reality. Okay, what are the pan-blue chances in 2008? Well, there are two, of course, main candidates are Wang Jingping and Ma Ying-jeou, and it will be interesting to watch which one of them will becomes the nominee. Now, in politics, really, to try and predict that far in advance is foolish. If one just looks back at the Democratic election, it looked like Kerry was out about, 10 months ago, and Howard Dean was the man, but Kerry got the nomination within that short time frame. He did a complete about-face. Now, also, of course, in this factor is that Lien Chan is probably bowed out of the scene, but James Song is still trying to cling to some vestige of power and trying to broker his way in. And this, in my mind, will only be to the detriment of the Blue Party. They have to really look to the future, look to candidates who will appeal more to a localization factor in Taiwan politics. And so it will be interesting to see as the positioning goes on between Wang Jingping and Ma Ying-jeou. Okay, the Green camp has two, right now, strong candidates, the mayor of Kaohsiung and the mayor of Taipei-Xian. And that one also is up for grabs. In my mind, in politics, predicting a candidate 4 years from now is suicide for the predictor. I just say those are the four strong candidates now, but we're talking, 3.5 years, so I really want to risk no more than that. As far as predictions, I think probably the first thing to watch will be the December elections. I think those will be very definite factors, because even though there's been plenty of wake-up calls for the different parties, the way the December elections go will really be the mark for, as I say, probably the death knell of one group and the realization of both groups. Now, for the DPP, they will of course face the danger of overconfidence after that, and I think you will find a sorting out of different opinions in their group as to what should be their direction. And I think the KMT and the PFP will also really have to sort out and face the reality of localization. They will have to see that the old guard has just been continually dragging them down. I would say for Taiwan's sake that I hope the KMT can adjust itself, because any democracy needs at least two strong parties minimum, so that any party that is in power does not get overconfident or does not give way to the easy chance of corruption. And for that reason, I hope the KMT can reassess itself and become a strong participant in Taiwan politics. But it has to come to the reality of the situation and see where the people are. This is the issue in any democracy. You have to see what the people really want and feel. Of course, you have to guide them and lead them in some ways, but still you have to answer to the needs of the people. And this has been the consistent problem of the KMT. On the mainland, that's why they lost the mainland to the communists. You know, whether the communists were any better than the KMT as a one-party system controlling all isn't the issue. The real question is, why did the people be convinced? And the KMT can't understand why the people didn't like their one-party control. And they haven't been able to grasp that here. They've got to, in a way, democratize themselves. But for Taiwan, I do hope we have at least two strong parties who can check and balance each other and keep responsive to the people's needs. Now, in judging any political people, you have to see how they perform over the long distance. And you have to see how they are affected by what I call the limelight, the attraction and glory of being in the spotlight. And I've written a series of articles on what I call fatalities of the limelight. And two key fatalities in Taiwan's history that are fatalities of the limelight, who have really, in a way, sold out to try and remain in the limelight. And maybe they didn't have principles in the first place, but they would be Shushin Liang and Sissy Chen. Shushin Liang, in my mind, is a man who needs to be in front of a parade. He doesn't care what they believe or anything as long as they let him be their leader. And he is a man, in my mind, whose recent actions have shown how desperate he is to stay in the limelight. Sissy Chen is the one whose flamboyance has always kept her in the limelight. And Sissy Chen has, of course, switched from one party to the other, and I will be writing about her, but basically in this last election, Sissy Chen showed that she was ending up as a hired gun for the KMT and PFP, and that she will talk principles, but in the final analysis, she will go where she feels the money is. Yeah, I do think that was a significant crossing of the line. Yeah. Now, Sissy Chen, of course, had been very strong with the Green camp in his early years, and Sissy Chen is a media person, so she understands, how the media works and how you should try and keep in the limelight. Sissy Chen also catered to the Blue camp, but the real crossing of the line, Sissy Chen had, even though she was sponsored by the Blue on TV and probably was in a way sought after by them because of her previous Green leanings, her real crossing of the line, in my mind, was the evening of the election when she got up and said with the Blue leaders, I have the proof. I have the proof that the shooting is all a fake. And she really crossed the line and put herself as the hired gun. And that was a line crossing that she won't be able to go back from. Now, since then, she had said, well, the KMT told me they had the proof, and that's the reason I made the statement. But anyone who is as media conscious as Sissy Chen knows you don't make such statements without the final repercussion. So she will always, in my mind, hereafter be the hired gun. Well, yeah, I think it was the jumping. Here they're only, the shooting was at 2, and I believe their press conference was around 10 in the evening. You are only 8 hours from the shooting, and the police are still trying to gather evidence. Everyone is trying to gather evidence. The president has been treated in the hospital, and they have already come to their conclusion. It's that coming to a conclusion without any proof that has been the consistent downfall of the KMT and the PFP side.